So today we're going to be talking about Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman, or as the ESV heading says, the woman who fears the Lord. So what are some things that you guys think about, or how do you feel when you think about the Proverbs 31 woman?
I was thinking of the purple cloth first.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pick that on purpose?
I did, yeah. I was like, I gotta have something clean that's purple because it's an appropriate day to do so. Anything else that we think of about the Proverbs 31 woman? I feel like she gets referenced a lot, but not necessarily like in detail talked through. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of background about the section of Proverbs 31. So it's viewed as a poem that was likely spoken to Solomon by his mother, obviously when he was young, as kind of like a bedtime poem about the ideal woman or the ideal wife that he should be seeking out. And a lot of Proverbs is written in this way that's very poetic and lost, kind of when we switch and translate it to English. So this is written in an alphabetic acrostic. Does anyone know what that is? People that are in school. An alphabetic acrostic? No. I didn't know what it was either. So the section on the virtuous woman, each verse starts with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet and it goes in alphabetical order. So the very rough translation is if you were to give her traits in alphabetical order. So in English, it would be like amazing, beautiful, caring, diligent, like A, B, C, D, all the way through the alphabet. But what that does when you read through it in English is it feels very jumpy in a topical way, because it will be talking about how she labors and works hard, and then there's a verse about her relationship with her husband, and then it goes back to her working with merchants and selling things. But that's just because of the way it's structured as a poem. And obviously we just can't tell that when you translate it to English. So the way I kind of divided it up is into those topics. So it is going to seem like we kind of go back and forth throughout this section, but it's just easier to talk about the topics when you kind of categorize them in that way. So before we go through some of the more practicals, I actually wanted to work backwards a little bit and read a couple of the verses at the end that are sort of the goal of the virtuous woman. So if I could ask for someone to read, basically if you're all open to Proverbs 31, that's pretty much the only place we're going to be. It's very easy. We don't have to flip around very much. So if I could have someone read verses 28 and 31.
28 and 31? Not
Yeah,
through 31.
right.
Okay.
We're very jumpy.
Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates.
Thank you. So we see here that her reward, sort of, for being the virtuous woman is praise. So we see that she's praised by her children, her husband, but also that she's praised in the gates. And of course, we're not meant to do things for man or to get praise from man, but we're to do things for the Lord. But we do see these people that she's praised by are not necessarily random people or strangers, but they're specifically the people that are closest to her in her life, so her children and husband. And they are the ones that would know her best. And would know that she has all these traits and are worthy of praise. But ultimately, the actual goal would to be praised in the gates. We're not seeking out that praise from our husband and kids if we're not getting it, but we do look forward to hearing that praise in the gates from these things. And then, could I have someone read verse 30? Verse 30. Verse 30.
Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is sweet praise.
Thank you. So I just wanted to emphasize that there's a lot of practicals in this that we're going to go through. But really, the reason that she's worthy of praise is her fear of the Lord. And so we obviously are going to be going through a lot of practical checkbox type of things. But ultimately, she's a God-fearing woman. This is a description of a God-fearing woman. And that is why she is to be praised. So when we go through these practical things, I basically group them into two groups. So the way that she labors and her relationships with others. So we're going to start with the verses about labor. Could I have someone read verse 27?
Excuse me. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness.
Thank you. So this is a really good summary verse about the way that she labors. This is talking specifically about the way she labors for her household, and how she looks over her household well and not spending time being idle. And one of the things I was thinking of when I was reading this is how, especially having young kids, it seems like I'm always busy. But I read somewhere sort of a interesting tip that when you feel like you have no extra time in your day, to write out everything you do, like just what you're doing in the day with the time frame that it takes you to do it, and it just helps you see where you're actually spending that time. Like, are you taking too long to do something that, you shouldn't be spending that much time in, or are there gaps where you do have sort of idle time? And the importance of not being idle isn't just about being like inefficient or you're not working hard enough, but sometimes being idle can open the door to an opportunity for sinful things, either like sinful thoughts or like sinful activities when you just aren't doing anything. So one of the things that we'd want to be careful of is not having too much like empty filler space for sin. Does anyone else have any like input or thoughts on not being idle, or if you find that you have idle time, something you could do with that little bit of free time here and there?
This time of year, a lot of nursing homes have members, people there who don't have family.
Mm-hmm.
So you could come up with a craft or something for you and your family to do. A couple years back, my aunt and I, after my mom passed away 8 years ago, we sat down and went to Walmart. We got the clear glass ornaments, and we got red and green paint, white and blue, and one year we got black. And then we just made different ornaments with different colors and just swirled them around. Or if you know, or if you can sew and want to do a project like that, you can make little lap blankets, or you can make them things to tie onto their walkers so they can put like stuff during the day on there, or just basically make any kind of thing, crochet blankets or whatever. There's not everybody there has somebody there that thinks about them, so
Right.
that would be one good thing you can do, and give things out to the homeless, do things like that, find little projects to do for the kids to do, or even if you want to make cookies and take it to your neighbor, the grouchy neighbor down the street, you can do that. Just find little projects to do.
Yeah, that's really nice, especially for this time of year in the holidays. Anything else for like little, like maybe few minutes you have here or there? Anything you can do?
When I have caught everything up, and I do have those few minutes where I don't feel like something's pressing down on me, I see my house more clearly and I want to declutter. That's when I see things for what they really are and their value in my home.
Mm-hmm.
And I can take a trip to Goodwill. Like, I can fill up the back of my van in a minute.
Nice.
Stuff that has just like filtered its way into my house. So
That's helpful, and that makes you feel better in the long run once you get it out and you're clean.
yeah. And if you're only giving yourself a few minutes, it's like this mad dash. Like, how many things can I grab?
Right.
So it's not a tearing a whole room apart. It's just grabbing those things that don't bring joy or are unnecessary in my home.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of things I was thinking about as well is just picking up the Bible and reading or praying. I can be guilty of thinking that I need to like have this specific, like this is my time with God. But if I have 3 minutes, I can pray. Like I can read something really quick. It doesn't have to be, I gotta be sitting in my room. I have to be quiet. I have to have soft music playing. It doesn't have to be great. I can squeeze in that kind of thing. So our next couple verses, could someone read verses 14 and 15? Thank you.
She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens.
So we see one of the ways that she's kind of getting extra time in her day is by rising early to prepare food. And we also see that she says that she's bringing food from afar, which just indicates how much effort and forethought she's putting into feeding her household. So it's not necessarily just a secondary thought. Of course, nowadays we are quite blessed with not needing to bring our food from afar because we can so quickly go to a grocery store and we can plan ahead and have food in our freezers in our garages or whatever. But I was trying to think of ways that we can still apply this, bringing food from afar, and thoughtful ways to provide food for our household. And so just some little things I was thinking of was being conscious of meal prepping and planning so we're not wasting food, and we don't get to those days where you seem like you have a lot of things in your fridge but somehow you can't make a meal out of it. Like, how does that happen? But we see that she's thoughtful about this kind of thing and is prepping and planning, and then bringing food from afar. Can anyone think of a sort of modern day application for that?
You don't have to have the same schedule all the time. You can, like, if I was married and I'd have a family that was different than the one I currently have, I'd have a taco night. I'd have an Italian night. I would have different types of nights to have different things. Or even be creative. Think of silly things like have an outer space night where everything has to look like stars and moons.
Yeah.
Just go nuts with it.
Right, a little bit of variety. Also, too, just in sourcing, she could have been bringing her food from afar for a lot of reasons. Either that's where things were planted, or that's where animals were raised, or whatever. But we can still be mindful about where we shop, whether we're concerned about organic things or we're more budget conscious. We do have a lot of options. They're just not afar. They are on that one strip of 37. They're all right across the street. So we can still be kind of mindful in that way. And so our next set of verses is still about laboring in the household. Could I have someone read, so there's 3 verses, 19, 21, and 22. Thank you.
She puts her hand in the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself, her clothing is fine linen and purple.
So that's why I wore this shirt today, because it's purple. Like Exhibit A, no. I couldn't help it. So all these verses talk about how she clothes her household. And again, I was reading through these, and I was like, praise God that it's so easy to source clothes for our household. This is obviously talking about how she is making all of these things. I know Paulette did like a sewing class a while ago, and one of the things that she has mentioned from it is that it's actually more expensive now, tends to be more expensive to make your own things than it is to buy something with a coupon or just somewhere that's inexpensive. So we do have to sort of translate this into more modern day examples of how we can be mindful of clothing our family members. So a couple things I was thinking of was you can still be mindful of watching out for worn items, especially for people that may not vocalize when they need something. Funny enough, obviously I have little kids that can't tell me when something's worn out or too small or whatever, but my husband is another one that like will not say when he has holes in his shoes. So I literally just have to watch because he won't say anything. He'll like have a toe poking out of his shoes. And I'm like, when was the last time we got you shoes? How is this happening? So for me personally, that's just something I have to be aware of. But also for us, modesty is a big thing. As much as it's easy to go to Walmart and get all of the things, we have to be conscious of being in the world but not dressing of the world. And so that's something that we can be mindful of and think closely about. And then I also wanted to mention the verse 22 that talks about her being clothed in purple, that this virtuous woman likely did not put herself before her family in any category, but she did still see value and put effort into her appearance and clothing. So even though most of the emphasis is how she is serving others and laboring for her household well, she doesn't neglect herself in the process. So yeah, that's just something for us to be aware of as well. We can dress nice in purple, you know, it's okay. And so the next couple verses we're going to look at are laboring outside of the home. Could I have someone first read verses 13 and 16? Yes, thank you.
She chooses wool and flax. She loves to work with her hands. She considers a field and buys it. She uses some of the money she gets from land.
And then I have two more verses, verses 17 and 24. Thank you.
She draws on her strength and reveals that her arms are strong. She makes and sells linen garments and delivers clothes to merchants.
Thank you. We do have to double dip with verse reading because there's so few of us. So we do see here the blessing that a working mom or wife or just woman in general can be. We see how she can be making an income, but some of these examples of working outside the home may not necessarily be income producing, but we do still see her working. So like the seeking of wool and flax, it could have been for her to sell it, it could have been income producing, or it could have been she was seeking it out to be used by her family or somebody in her household that did something with it and sold it. So there's just a lot of options with those. But the main principle I wanted to focus on was in verse 13, that she works with willing hands. So we would just want to take away from this that whether it's for income or not, and the way that we work is that she's working with willing hands. So when we are working, whether in our jobs or just in any way really, do we delight in our work? Are we working joyfully and willingly when we find that work comes into our path? Or do we tend to do so begrudgingly or just because we have to? And then in verse 16, we see that she works diligently. It says that she considers a field and buys it. So it's sort of the like work smarter, not harder type thing. I don't think that was mine. I'm like keeping an eye out. And so again, may or may not be for profit. It could just be something planning for her household, or land to be used for her household, but either way she's showing diligence in the process. I was trying to think of some practical examples for this, but as far as working outside the home, and being diligent in doing so, a lot of those examples are going to be so specific to like what your job is and how you can work diligently. But one of the more household focused ones I was thinking of is budgeting. So even if you're not bringing in an income, or in addition to bringing in an income, you can still sort of find extra money for your household if you're diligent about the way you budget. And so that's just a way that we can sort of consider, as it says, or plan things. And then in verse 17, it says that she has strength and makes her arms strong. So likely that's not talking about her literally going to the gym and weightlifting a lot of things. It's more so talking about keeping herself capable and available to work. Can anyone think of any examples? This is a little bit interesting, but of ways that we can keep ourselves available and capable of work at all times. I know it's a little bit of a stretch. The main thing I was thinking of this is just being aware of needs that you can fill. There's a lot of people in our church, actually, and I'm thinking about women specifically, that can look out for very specific ways to fill a need and also bring in an income for their family. There are people that are really good at cooking, that cook and sell food out of their own kitchen, or people that have a talent or a joy in cleaning, and so they do that kind of thing. But the biggest thing with keeping her arms strong or keeping herself capable that we can do is just keeping ourselves aware of needs that we can fill, or just areas that we have a talent and can work in that way. So that concludes the labor section. And I just wanted to go back to verse 31, which is, give her of the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. So I just wanted to emphasize really that when we're seeking out and working willingly or diligently, even if it's to make an income or not, if it's just in service to our household, that ultimately we are to be working as if we're working for the Lord. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. So in any type of laboring, if we're at a job, even with other people involved, with bosses that we would want to please, our household that we want to be happy, ultimately we are to be working as if for the Lord and not for men. So the next few verses we'll look at are about the virtuous woman's relationships with others. Can I have someone read verses 11 and 12? Thank you. Please do.
Part of her husband kisses her. He will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life.
Thank you. So when we read this, this is obviously specifically talking about the relationship between husband and wives, but I was trying to also translate this into other close relationships, because there's people in here that are not yet wives. And so one other relationship we can sort of use for this example is a child with your parents. So for the teens, or is everybody a teen? Younger? I don't know. I'm like, but regardless, not married, would be, do you have that trust from your parents? And I was thinking of, there's a lot of examples of how you can build trust with a person, but one of the keys to this is in verse 12, when it says she does him good and not harm all the days of her life. So it says all the days of her life, which basically means you're not going to get married and immediately he's going to trust you with like every 100% fiber of his being. It has to happen every single day for your entire life. Like, it never stops. It's every single day. It's a constant thing. And in one sense, that can seem like a lot of work. Like, whoa, every single day we need to work on building trust. But at the same time, that trust will just naturally happen if you're in a loving and God-honoring marriage or any relationship. If we go back to the seeking out to do good and not harm to those that we are closest to. And then the next verse talks about the result of being a virtuous wife in that way. So could I have someone read verse 23?
Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land.
So I was super impressed by this verse because I feel like when we talk about the household, rightly so, there is a lot of emphasis on the leadership of the husband, how he's to be the head of the household and the spiritual leader and accountable for his wife and all these things. And that's a lot of pressure on the husband. But in this verse, it basically says that due to this woman being a virtuous wife and feeding him well, clothing him well, doing good, not harm, building up trust, that he will be known among the elders in the gates. So even though it can seem like maybe being a wife is like a background or supportive role sometimes, that support is very much needed and will bless a husband. In Proverbs 18:22, it says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." So that really just indicates the importance of being a virtuous wife. And even if it seems like a secondary or supportive role, it's really not, because this is helping our husbands to obtain favor from the Lord, which I just thought was really impressive and kind of crazy to think about, for a man to be known by his wife in the gates with the elders of the land. That's just wild. So the next verses that we're going to talk about are about relationships outside of the household. So could I have someone read verse 18?
She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night.
So there's actually a few interpretations of this verse that I thought were kind of interesting. The most obvious one that we probably hear a lot is that she works so much, she's up all night, lamp never goes out because she's working all the time through the night. Like a literal example of burning the candle at both ends. Another example or interpretation of this is that she runs such an efficient home with this lamp always burning because they did not have modern electricity. And apparently it could be hard to get a lamp restarted. So this could be an example of her being very efficient in keeping track of things in the household to make sure that their light or their heat source would not be out when they woke up in the morning. And we already kind of talked about efficiency with running your household. So that could just be another example of that. But the interesting interpretation that I found was that the lamp was a sign of her being hospitable. So the light on in the window could have been a sign to travelers passing through that their household was open for guests. So there weren't like hotels, like Holiday Inns back then. So when travelers were going through a town at night and they needed a place to stay, the light being on in the window would be a symbol that that is somewhere that they could find rest and hospitality. So this lamp being on all through the night could just be a symbol that all the time she was ready to be hospitable, taking guests at literally any time. And so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on for our application, is just being hospitable with those outside of our household and using our household for that. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody was probably, maybe this is common sense, but my parents always were like, if you think someone's coming over, if you know they're coming over at night, always make sure the porch light is on. That was just like a really big thing that they would ask us like 10 times. So if the porch light is on, if somebody was coming over, especially like my grandma, make sure that porch light's on. So that's a very literal interpretation of this verse, having a lamp on in the window. But what are some other ways that we can be ready to serve or host and be hospitable at all times?
Well, having your just helps you be like, yes, come in.
Right.
Where they don't have to step over stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And helps you be less stressed out. People
It
are coming
does.
over because you're not doing the
Don't
crunch
apologize
time.
for your house even if they walk in
Right.
the door.
Yeah. Sorry, we live here. It's like, any other ideas of how we can be hospitable at all times?
If this church has a project, with us, when we decided we're going to do a project where we're giving out toys for the homeless. And say both Carries or the head of the committee, if they ask you to be a part of it and you can, don't come up with an excuse not to be a part of it.
Right. Follow through. So I like Carrie's example of having a welcoming home. I was thinking too of when you're serving people or feeding people, being aware of their food preferences. I know people have different, I guess, opinions on this, but when I have people over that have kids, I like to make kid-friendly food just because I don't want the parents to have to fight that battle when they're supposed to be having a relaxing evening in my home. We try to make our kids eat whatever we serve, but I'm not going to make somebody else's kids do that. So I try to be, try to make it a relaxing evening in that way. And then something interesting that my husband actually heard when he was doing his beginning of seminary was one of the pastors said, if you're going to go into ministry, you have to be hospitable, basically. And he said, even down to when you're buying a house, being aware of the layout of that home and how easily are you able to have guests, not necessarily like to have a whole extra guest room, because sometimes that's just not practical, but like the layout of your living area. Again, that is not saying like go buy a new house, but when you're looking for a house, keeping in mind hospitality and having the availability to have more people over to your house and being hospitable in that way. Our next verse is verse 20. Could someone read verse 20? Thank you.
She opened her hands to the poor, and reached out her hands to the needy.
So this is an example of her actively seeking out people and ways to be charitable. I like Sherry's idea of, especially this time of year, going into homes and doing activities and crafts with people. Because sometimes serving people doesn't have to be literally like giving them something. Filling a need can just be time and effort. And when I was thinking of examples, I was literally thinking of how great our church is at doing this. We're so good at filling needs. Like, you put up a sign up for someone that just had a baby, like bring them food, and then people are texting me saying, can you add more slots? It's already full. So it's like, our church is so good at this, or helping people move, and just kind of in general filling in needs in that way. So my prayer is that just we continue to do so. And for those of us that may have close relationships with people in the church that maybe don't have that many relationships, just that we would have our eyes open to their needs. It's not just like, this virtuous woman is not just sitting back and like waiting for a sign up to pop up. She is reaching her hands out to help, and likely even knows needs before they are voiced to her. So my prayer would just be that we continue to serve our church family in that way, and just keep an eye out for those opportunities in whatever way that might come up. And our last practical verse is verse 26. Could someone read 26?
She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue.
So this probably has been and could be an entire hour-long class or longer, talking about speech and taming the tongue. And I literally, there are so many verses on it, I couldn't even narrow it down. So I didn't even mention another one because there are so many. Just talking about the importance of our speech. So I'm just going off of this one specifically, that she does not, it says that she opens her mouth with wisdom, which means that her mouth is not always open. So she is wise about when she speaks, and also the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So the saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, obviously comes to mind. I feel like when we think about correcting others, at least when I think about it, a lot of the time we're trying to build people up, that if you see sin in someone's life, this is how you can approach them, you should approach them, and kindness and all these things. And I find it easy to be kind with people outside my household, but realistically, the teaching of kindness, for me personally, who do I need to be aware of teaching kindly is my children. Because there's a lot of teaching and correcting that happens there. And is the teaching of kindness always on my tongue? No, it is not. And so that's something that I need to examine. And I did just want to leave this as kind of a self-reflect section for everyone to just examine your own speech, think about ways that maybe you overspeak or speak frivolously at times where maybe it's best to just keep silent, and also examine any areas where we lack kindness in our speech and how we can be more loving in our speech towards others, since we know that the tongue is so powerful. So we've made it through all the practicals. I wanted to go back to the last few verses we read. Could someone read, this is a bigger section, maybe I shouldn't have said that so somebody would volunteer, verses 28 to 31. Yeah, thank you.
Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her enemies.
So we already talked about how the praise from others can be the evidence or result of having these traits of a virtuous woman, and that the most important praise that we want to be seeking is not necessarily the praise of man, although that may naturally come as a response to these traits, but really we're seeking after the praise in the gates, and that the ultimate reason for a woman to be praised is to be a woman who fears the Lord. So even though the bulk of this passage of the virtuous woman, it's a lot of practical things, but the whole foundation is just that she is a God-fearing woman. One of the things that this Bible study book that we're kind of basing these lessons on, one of the things it said about the virtuous woman is that she is not to be the yardstick by which all women are measured, but the goal toward which all women should be moving. So really, with our goal to fear the Lord and to seek to become more and more like Him, closer and closer to Christ, ultimately these traits will just kind of naturally come as we just seek to be closer to Him and really look at that more broad goal of being a God-fearing woman.